Right now in my neighborhood, justice is if you own a business, you can park as many cars on the grass as you want. But if you're the resident who lives across the street and you park one car on the grass, you get a $100 fine. While the business is exempt from any fines, nothing can happen to them, even though the laws are written the same way for both types of parcels. Our median income is about $21,000 a year. And so that $100 fine can be 15% of somebody's income for the month.
Well, welcome back to this week's episode of Neighboring Podcast. We're in episode 4 of our What Makes a Healthy Neighborhood Healthy discussion. And we're here today with Arline and Jim, longtime residents and active leaders in the Hoagland Masterson neighborhood. And we're really excited to hear from them, to learn about a bit more about Hoagland Masterson. It's a downtown kind of collar neighborhood. It's got its challenges. There's committed neighbors like these two that have been working tirelessly for the last couple of years and certainly pushing a boulder uphill most of the time, it seems like, based on our previous discussions. So this is a really exciting discussion because this is kind of one of the first discussions of the 5 neighborhoods that we're discussing that has had some challenges, and it's not growing, developing, all exciting, but there's a lot of like really good things. It's just at maybe a different volume than the other neighborhoods. So I'm excited to have this discussion and have an honest discussion about not all development is good development, or some of us miss the development that other neighborhoods are getting. So what does that mean, and how do we address or work forward through that? So welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Would love for you guys to introduce yourselves. How long have you lived in the neighborhood? How did you find Hoagland Masterson? So Arline, would you kick us off, introduce yourself, when you came to Hoagland Masterson, and kind of what attracted you in the first place?
I've lived in Hoagland Masterson since 2013, and it's been a lifelong dream to renovate a Victorian house. And there's one there for me. My boyfriend had looked at it a year and a half maybe before I bought it, and he tried to look at it, but his agent said she wouldn't show anybody a house in that kind of a neighborhood, so he never got to walk through it. When I actually did get to buy it, my own insurance agent, instead of insuring it, he yelled at me and told me to find another agent.
Wow.
So the house I bought had been empty for 4 years, and it needed a lot of work before I could move into it.
That's a common, we hear that a lot. That's a very common kind of situation in our particular area. Maybe it's starting to change the last couple of years, but it isn't uncommon for realtors that don't have a lot of context for historic neighborhoods, or even certain parts of town they're uncomfortable with. They just kind of take the reputation and kind of refuse to take their folks through. Yeah. It's really interesting to think about, but it's not a uncommon experience from what I'm learning.
No, it's
that
not.
was part of it.
Yeah, I would echo that. It's somewhat skewed against our type of neighborhood. Both the real estate and the insurance and the banking would rather operate in other areas.
Yeah, it's so wild. You'd think you would just want to sell a house or meet your customers' demands.
Yeah,
certain things.
yeah. I would say most properties sell until probably recently with electric works going in. Just sell person to person.
Wow.
No realtor, no bank, cash transactions. Fill out the paperwork yourself and take her downtown.
Wow. So Jim, introduce yourself. How long have you been in Hoagland Masterson? How did you find that neighborhood?
Yeah, Jim Obergfell. We've been there about 10 years, I would say. We came a different route. We have a property over on Rudisol and Harrison, but our daughter and her husband are in the military, and she was looking at a place that she could call home in a worst case scenario if her husband would have, heaven forbid, some issue in Afghanistan when he was assigned there. So she picked this place out off the internet and came and purchased it in 30 days when they were on leave. So as they left, they asked us to take care of it. So after a little bit of perplexed thoughts on how to handle that, we decided to move in. So that's how we showed up in Hoagland Masterson.
All right.
So that's our story. Since we've been here, we have acquired some vacant lots and other properties. So we're invested in the neighborhood now, and happy to be there.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. I don't think I knew that about how you guys first found yourselves in Hoagland Masterson.
Yeah, we had no intention of being here, but here we are.
You got there and you were involved.
As Aaron Rodgers, insurance agent, said, and yet here we are.
So I'm familiar with Hoagland Masterson just because it's across the street from the neighborhood that I live in Williams Woodland. But for our audience or other individuals that don't know much about Hoagland Masterson, can you guys try to paint a picture? Can tell us about Hoagland Masterson. What's the geography like? Where's it located? What's the housing look like? So if you were trying to describe to a new person coming to Fort Wayne, try to paint a picture of where and what Hoagland Masterson's like. Maybe you guys can split that up.
Yeah. Hoagland Masterson is just south of the railroad tracks, so it falls into the category, in air quotes, south of the tracks. It is...
south of downtown.
Downtown,
right?
Correct. Yeah, we're probably about quarter mile, maybe, from the ball stadium straight through.
Okay.
You have to go around a bit to get under the underpass there, but so we're in a good location with all the downtown development, and now with the electric works coming on, so that's very positive. But the neighborhood itself goes back to the early 1900s. And as the industrial era was really blossoming here at that time, our neighborhood was a working class neighborhood. So people that were working in the industry located around the railroad tracks, which is not there now. Sure. But at that time, it was a very industrialized area in town. These people moved to this neighborhood, built tiny houses on small lots, and walked to work. So that's kind of the origin of the neighborhood itself. Now, there are some larger lots and some nicer houses, but by and large, they're smaller places due to the demographic when they were founded.
So a lot of working class housing.
Yeah.
1,500 square feet, bigger or less, mostly?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of the houses, I've noticed it once I figured it out, were probably started out about 700 square feet.
Okay.
And were added on to, which was the custom in the day, rather than moving to the suburb, as you got more resources and more established, that they would add on to their house rather than move away.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I would say probably of the smaller houses, that probably at least 30 to 40% that I've noticed fit that category.
Kind of smaller than built on.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Interesting. I don't know that I've really picked up or noticed, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And there are some bigger scale homes, like you mentioned, in those areas with some details and certain streets and different pockets. There's a lot. Arline, do you have anything to add from you? You are like one of the most in-depth researchers that I know that are living in a neighborhood, and it's vital to know the story and the history. Curious if you have anything to add about Hoagland Masterson and kind of painting that picture.
Some of our houses were built as early as the 1860s.
Oh, wow.
And I think there's some from the 1980s or 90s. I think we've got two that are pretty modern.
There's some habitat houses that would fit that.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Yes.
And originally the houses were really, really close together. Like you could spit in your neighbor's house from your own house if the windows lined up right. Through the years, a lot of them have been torn down because they just weren't maintained and had to be removed. So we've got a lot of gaps between houses, and because they didn't start off with a nice big lot or a yard, you could buy the lot next to you and add to it and increase the value of your house. The houses aren't terribly well maintained. We're about 60% rentals. We have 120 to 150 landowners, but nobody's terribly well off in the neighborhood, so they just do the best they can. A lot of them have siding on them. They haven't retained their historic characteristics.
Do you guys have historic designation in terms of like protecting certain aspects, like some other historic neighborhoods?
I believe there's a few houses that have historical designation, which mandates certain types of external reconstructions and repairs, yes.
Yeah.
But by and large, it's not.
Yeah. There's an area on Calhoun that is part of Williams Woodlands Historic District.
On
there's
Creighton, yes.
Yeah, and there's a house on Dewald that is a local historic district, the Grace Crosby House.
Okay.
She was a local architect.
All right. So Hoagland Masterson's always been somewhat of a working class neighborhood, like it was founded, developed by a working class, and driving through there now, you know, neighborhoods in 100 years kind of ebb and flow with the economy, but Hoagland Masterson has definitely been hit harder by the economy maybe than some others. And maybe how long ago, there's been a lot of blight elimination like you've talked about how long ago did like that blight elimination really come through and clear out a lot of property? You remember?
Well, I mean, it's ongoing now.
Sure.
Some of it's happened before I got there, so it probably goes back at least 15, 20 years, I would guess.
Mm-hmm. And when I became the president in 2016, I worked with neighborhood code compliance to point out some of the eligible houses for blight elimination.
So how long have you guys been involved in like neighborhood leadership? Let's talk about like some of the challenges that you guys have faced. So very active neighbors, desire to have the best neighborhood for yourselves, for your neighbors, choose to take leadership like many do. But I know that's been somewhat of a struggle for you guys. Can you guys share what it's been like being a leader in the neighborhood and trying to get other neighbors to get involved?
Yeah, I've probably been involved maybe 8 of the 10 years, I would think. It is difficult. It's you hit it right on the head. It's like pushing a rock uphill in a lot of ways. We could probably philosophize on that for quite a while. I'm not really sure what the answer is. It's not the difficulty with community building and that type of thing is not only in our neighborhood, I'm sure. Yeah. Every neighborhood fights that, but as we're a little bit lower on the economic strata, it might be even an added degree of difficulty beyond what our culture is kind of settled on right now as far as community involvement and those types of things. But it's definitely a challenge to getting people involved, people to help out, paying dues, any kind of thing that just help push the neighborhood in the right direction.
Sure.
That's a result of about 30 years of political neglect, because for those 30 years, the people that lived there, if they did something to try to improve their neighborhood, they were the subject of enforcement of minutia, while the people who were destroying the neighborhood, the deadbeats and criminals, there was no enforcement against them. But if you stuck your head out, you got kicked. And we're still dealing with that legacy.
Do you have like a particular example where there was a group of neighbors that tried to enact a change or were trying to work something where they kind of met some resistance?
Not on the group level, but if you're the little homeowner and there's something wrong with your house, you will be cited for it. But if you live next to a slum and there's a drug dealer selling drugs off the front steps, well, there's nothing we can do about that, sorry.
Interesting.
They don't get... Their slums aren't really...
Yeah, I would add that there's a little bit of protection for the corporations, the rental people.
They're considered investors.
Okay.
We wouldn't want to hurt the investors.
So in a way, that skews it a bit. Drug enforcement and crime enforcement are, in my opinion, they travel slower because they have to build a court case in most cases. Mm-hmm. Where code enforcement can act very quickly because all they got to do is fill out some forms and send it to you.
Yeah.
So it's a little different dynamic, but it does play out in that way. The neighborhoods feel, in a lot of cases, that the other guys get away with all kinds of crap, and then they get pounded for little things.
Okay. So you're picking up on a lot of conversations of homeowners that are living there, trying to maintain a property, invest, live the quality of life that they want or deserve. recognizing some neighbors around them that are either A, not taking care of their properties in the same way due to lack of interest, or they're a tenant, or whatever the issues are, or they're living next to some sort of crime riddled or drug related property, trying to do what's right, and met with resistance or lack of compassion, or met with a broken system that doesn't bring solutions quick enough.
Yeah, and I don't know if I would call the system broken. It's just a complicated problem.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of individuals and agencies trying to navigate it, and but it's very complicated. I mean, to bring resolution in it. As I say, we could talk about it for hours. I don't have solutions that I can, lay out there and say, hey, if we did this and this and this, everything would be fine.
Sure.
But it is a complicated socioeconomic problem that exists.
Well, I think these challenges and some others we'd love to hear about are common in so many neighborhoods, like yourselves, who are full of neighbors that are trying to do what is right in the processes that are put in front of them, and for whatever reason, just not feel like they're making any progress.
Mm-hmm.
And how defeating that is. You try once, you try twice, maybe you try a third time, and you feel like you're not making it, and then you multiply that by a number of neighbors, and then here you are a neighborhood association that's encouraging neighbors to keep going with this, and it's like, yeah, but that doesn't work. So what do we do with that?
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a more common issue than most people think or are aware of, especially in a lot of our neighborhoods in Fort Wayne.
When I first became the president of the association in 2016, I tried to address a lot of the problems head on, and I got laughed at, and I was told, oh, there's a socioeconomic problem there, as if that's the reason we cannot have nice things. I got patted on the head and sent on my way without receiving any help, and sometimes I just got laughed at outright.
Oh, that's disappointing. What are some other challenges that you guys have faced that seems been to be challenging? You shared quite a few. I'd be curious to know whether you have some additional thoughts on that. Like, what does justice look like or not look like in neighborhoods?
Right now in my neighborhood, justice is if you own a business, you can park as many cars on the grass as you want. But if you're the resident who lives across the street and you park one car on the grass, you get a $100 fine. While the business is exempt from any fines, nothing can happen to them, even though the laws are written the same way for both types of parcels. Our median income is about $21,000 a year. And so that $100 fine can be 15% of somebody's income for the month. A lot of my neighbors are disabled. We share a census tract with Poplar neighborhood where 60% of the residents are on disability.
Yeah. Trying to live on $800 to $1,200 a month.
660.
Yeah.
That's usually what my neighbors get.
Yeah, that's a difficult scenario.
That's almost impossible.
Yeah.
And to expect them to be able to fight for their own rights, it's really asking too much because they're struggling to get by.
Correct.
They've got a really hard life.
And one of the things I believe our neighborhood is really on a positive trend. But I believe that's because when we started the association, we started to squeak a little bit. And unfortunately, in my opinion, governmental agencies only respond to a squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
So without representation, even though it's pushing a rock up the hill, or without any representation, the neighborhood tended to go the wrong direction. I mean, the curbs didn't get fixed a lot of times, and issues like that type that you would think would spread out fairly across the governmental area, in my opinion, seemed to go to where most of the money was, where the organized neighborhood associations were. They knew how to fill out the forms. They knew who to talk to. They could call in a favor from somebody that's in there and get things to happen at the expense of neighborhoods that were not represented and not squeaking, for lack of a better word. And I think we've been able to reverse a little of that just by being present at the table and trying to figure out how a lot of this stuff works. So
I agree. If you listen to Kay, who's the president of the North Highlands neighborhood, I mean, they had some pretty significant infrastructure issues, and she talks pretty clearly about like how unified they had to be, and how unified, how educated they needed to be on the particular issues. They were leveraging some strengths of some of the neighbors who could really make a case with government to deal with some infrastructure, and they just were very persistent and made a
Yes.
huge difference.
yes, and I would agree that that's the way it would work.
Yeah.
Where in a perfect world, you would think all the neighborhoods
Yeah.
would get their fair share.
Sure.
It just doesn't seem to be the reality of how it works.
I remember a handful of years ago where you guys were, I would say, relatively successful, especially having a history, beforehand in that area when the major, company was trying to move a bigger development project that didn't quite make sense on the edge of the neighborhood. The power company trying to build the substation, and there's a lot of case that many of you neighbors and some adjacent neighbors were really kind of pushing back. And while maybe it didn't kind of end up in the way that it made, there were some modifications that were made to make it work.
Yes.
And I saw like a lot more engagement on that companies of saying, okay, like, oh, we should probably just have these discussions and we got to respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
Curious if there's anything to add to that project.
Yeah, we did. We did get some nice shielding or facade put on the substation. It was an uphill battle again, and the city. I felt the city and the power company had worked a deal, and then we accidentally found out about it and started to squawk, and we had to fight through the inertia that had already been created. And we were somewhat successful,
Yeah.
but but it takes some energy. I think if we had not stood up, we'd had just a regular
Razor wire.
substation and with chain link fence around it and
Yeah.
on the edge of our neighborhood. So
They were going to put razor wire around the top of it.
Sure.
And I asked if I would be able to put that around my yard. No.
No.
yeah.
No.
But I think in retrospect, the deal, the location, everything had already been
Yeah.
worked out behind the scenes, and then we found out about it, and then they invited our input, but everything was mostly already decided.
Sure.
But we did make some gains. I have to tip my hat to AEP for what they did do.
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, they ended up being a good neighbor within the constraints that had already been established. And,
Yeah.
It was a good win for us.
So you guys have been tireless working on these things. There's lots of challenges. What are some of the things that you feel like, besides maybe that AEP project, that have gone well, or where do you sense some momentum happening in Hoagland Masterson? Do you sense any momentum?
Our sidewalks were fixed.
Okay.
The mayor fixed our sidewalks, and I had described an elderly woman who had a leg amputated being pushed in the street by her grandchildren for her afternoon walks because the sidewalks were not passable. They couldn't have pushed her chair over our sidewalks. And he fixed our sidewalks, and it kind of surprised the whole neighborhood.
It did.
Yeah, and it really showed them, well, maybe we do matter.
But again, that was strategic because we had recently been declared the most walkable neighborhood in Fort Wayne. And as Arline primarily started to make a squawk, come look at our walkable sidewalks, there was just a little bit of leverage that they had created by their publicity
Right.
that we were a walkable neighborhood. And it worked out again in our favor. But if we hadn't had representation, if Arline hadn't been on the ball and taken advantage of that kink in their armor, so to speak, that
Sure.
it might not have happened. But
There can be a big difference between walkability scores that are generated via an online platform
Yeah.
and reality.
and the reality of it, correct, absolutely.
And we all stop short. Like we can get an article, we can do something, or we can think we're heading in the right direction, but have we really done the research? So good job on that.
Mm-hmm.
Are there some other momentum? We've talked with some of the other neighborhoods. This Electric Works major development project in Fort Wayne is happening not too far away from our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Are you starting to see any sort of speculative impact of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think people are starting to purchase with that in view that something's on the upswing. So I would agree. I think it's affecting our neighborhood.
Yeah. Houses going on the market now are going at about twice the price they did 2 years ago.
Yeah.
The good news is there's plenty of investors in the neighborhood. We're 60% rentals. And our landowners are very resilient. They're old, long-term families. They were here when it was a nice neighborhood. They saw it go downhill. And as we start to go back uphill, I think they'll be fine for a while.
What sort of concerns do you guys have in terms of like that speculation? Do you have any concerns, or like what are you welcoming, or really trying to protect against?
I'm worried about my neighbors not being able to pay their property taxes. When your income's $660 a month,
Yeah.
the difference between a $200 tax bill and a $1,000 tax bill is crushing.
Sure.
I've been squawking about it. I've been squeaking and pointing this out that, these people have sometimes lived in their houses for generations, and we shouldn't be so quick to kick them out because they can't afford their taxes.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would add that the investors and speculators, by definition, are primarily interested in their financial gain, which that's the system we live in, and that's understandable. But the gentrification that's going to follow will put stress on the non-gentrified neighbors that remain through taxes or increased neighborhood code violations and things that are going to come with that. As these investors want this neighborhood to come up, will put some kind of stress on those that aren't in that economic status. So, and that's one of the things that concerns me. How you deal with that, again, I don't know, but
Sure.
I can see that happening.
Yeah, it seems like Hoagland Masterson is 3 to 5 years away from just like being completely redeveloped in a way, right? Like it's such proximity to downtown development. If real estate is really moving downtown like they say it is, not everybody wants a condo or an apartment. Homes in 807 and 805 rarely stay on the market, so there's this resurgence back to the central core, and there is a market for turnkey, move-in ready houses for middle class educated individuals, and it's going to be really hard to not see that kind of move into Hoagland Masterson due to one, the opportunities and the vacancy in some of the vacant lots, and if you can buy a house for low that's vacant and renovate and tear down and put something else, you can start stringing 3 and 4 homes together. So it's really interesting to see, especially with Williams Woodland just to the south, who we're kind of expanding at our seams and wondering where development's going to go there, or are we just going to keep building an island in our own little island?
Now, something's going to happen. I'm not exactly sure what it'll be, but that scenario certainly is plausible, that these houses would be purchased and fixed up to a certain extent. Obviously, they're not quite a lot of them as historic and and have all the character of some of the Williams Woodland Park homes, of course. But it'll be interesting to see how this plans out or plays out in the future.
What are some of what's some of the vision you guys have? You've been working in the neighborhood for a while. You've documented the neighborhood better than most, other than maybe some of those people who have lived there for 30, 40 years or multiple generations. Curious, what are some ideas and visions that you guys have for the neighborhood? Like if you could kind of plan out the next 5 years, what are some of those ideas?
For me, I would like to see younger owner-occupiers purchase or acquire properties that are rentals. and kind of take ownership and fix them up and stake a claim and make a commitment to be there for, a period of time. I think part of the issues we struggled with is people are transient, not only in our neighborhood, but
Yeah.
all over.
Yeah.
And maybe more so in ours because of the rental nature and some of that thing. So it's hard to establish community when things are transient.
Yeah.
And people are coming and going, and you get to know somebody, and 6 months later they're gone. And it just takes time to establish relationships. So I think I would welcome, again, how this would ever happen, and probably would just be the Lord's doing if it does. But for people to make some kind of commitment, say, hey, this is a little gritty place, but maybe I could move in and make a difference and do something to help this neighborhood along.
Yeah. Arline, do you have some thoughts? What's your vision?
I just want to help my struggling neighbors to do a little bit better.
Yeah.
And I want to help the good people to live their good lives.
Yeah.
Make it easier for them.
That's great. Yeah, at NeighborLink we see so many of the same neighbors, and we try to do the best we can in Hoagland Masterson in terms of mobilizing some volunteers, but we really are burdened by the reality of so many people living on a fixed income that just don't have the resources to live independently.
Sure.
And their housing alternatives are all but non-existent.
Yeah.
Like, we would love to create some sort of program that helps people transition of like when you hit that point in your life where your asset, your home is no longer is at its greatest value. You retire, you move toward disability, whatever it is, your asset's not going to improve any more than what it is now. So what does it look like to help you transition to a place while you can get the most out of your asset to live that quality of life that is going to be for your next life? That transition point doesn't exist, especially when you factor in like, this is my home, it's paid off, like why would I ever leave? Like, you can't. Well, here you can make a case and maybe you can help a percentage, but you have to be able to provide them with something that's as good, if not better, than what they already have. And would love to see some of that happen. It's a huge need, but until that time happens, whatever that solution is, how do we care for the vulnerable in our neighborhoods that can continue to live independently, but are going to definitely be impacted either by the current status of their home or the impact of potential gentrification of a neighborhood. It's really challenging.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult situation. Most people have a way of getting by.
Yeah.
So, I mean, things get rough or
Yeah.
tighten up, they somehow get by.
Sure.
Whether the house doesn't get painted or the porch is falling through or something, but they're still struggling through it and making it happen. So,
What would you guys say are some of Hoagland Masterson's strengths?
Our neighbors are very resilient.
Okay.
They're good at hard times.
How do you feel like that plays out? How have you seen that happen?
They don't get overly upset with a bad situation. They just deal with it.
Okay.
They don't throw a tantrum. Doesn't do any good. They just get to work and deal with it. And I try to meet them where they are and help them in the moment.
Sure. Interesting. Jim, what do you feel like is one of the strengths you see?
yeah, I do. I think the people that, and we have a fair amount that have been there for years and years. I mean, I'm thinking like Tommy's.
His family's been there since 1936.
Yeah, I think Tommy was born in the neighborhood, and he's still there in the old homestead. And people like that, they're solid. I mean, that's good. They're good neighbors, and they look out for each other. And it's not the fanciest house around, but just good people. So,
What is there anything you would like to share we haven't talked about?
Not all renters are bad renters. There are renters in my neighborhood who have bought the vacant lot next to their rental so that their kids have a yard to play in.
What makes some of them good renters? Just they've chosen a rental lifestyle, but they're active in the neighborhood, obviously, if they're willing to invest in the vacant yard next to them, right?
Yeah. They're not transient. They're pretty much there to stay. A lot of them have family there. What you don't see is this is a family neighborhood. we have many, many, many families who have lived there for generations. I can think of probably 7 that have been there 4 generations. And you don't see that because you're driving past on a corridor with unkempt businesses and slummy houses sometimes, or, the drugs end up in the block closest to the corridors because you can just pop in off the corridor and get your drugs and go.
Sure.
But nobody stops and sees that this is a neighborhood of good old families who have lived here for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting narrative.
Mm-hmm.
It's an important narrative.
Yeah, there's more than you would think.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, we're not just a socioeconomic problem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the interesting part about this whole entire study for us. We're really looking to try to figure out what makes a healthy neighborhood healthy, and there's public perception of certain neighborhoods, and there's some reality on the socioeconomics that contribute to making a healthy neighborhood in terms of, income and educational attainment. But what we notice in every neighborhood, because we're all over the city in all different neighborhoods, and once you get to meet neighbors, you learn that they have vision, and then you learn they have a history, and they know what's going on. And you know what? There's a lot of really great neighborhoods that have a lot going on. The same things that they have going on in some areas that you would think are thriving, happening in places that the public says aren't thriving. Mm-hmm. So what is the difference in that balance? And that's part of what we're hoping to really learn through this process, so we can begin maybe talking about the narrative different, or bringing on the right kind of resources in order to strengthen that or encourage it. Mm-hmm. Not really sure. So we're excited to try to figure out truly what makes a healthy neighborhood healthy.
Well, it comes down to people. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly the only thing is people. You have good people, you'll have more healthy. If you have less good people, you'll have a less healthy neighborhood. And the more that they can learn and over time get to know each other and develop relationships, and that's kind of the cords that tie it together. But you mean the housing and the infrastructure and all that, that's, in my mind, very secondary to the people themselves.
Mm-hmm. If your neighborhood has only 50% with a high school diploma and you have 2 bachelor's degrees in the whole neighborhood, who runs your association? And I keep hearing, well, when those people show that they care, we can help them. And I'm not hearing that from any officials. I'm hearing it from other community leaders. Well, I can assure you those people care very deeply. They're just at a loss for how to fix this terrible, terrible situation.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer. And so they end up not doing anything. Or, that's not going to work. Or it's too hard for them to take on in their daily struggle to get by.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, to kind of wrap up this particular podcast, we always kind of in the session with this idea of like what makes a good neighbor. So we'd love to hear from each of you. Is like what is a good neighbor? Arline, what is a good neighbor to you?
Somebody that doesn't pick on the other neighbors.
Okay. Yeah.
Just making it easier for the good people to live their good lives.
Yeah. Jim, what do you think makes a good neighbor?
I think people in general are good. So I kind of start with that premise that everybody there wants to do the right thing. Sometimes the situation applies pressure that maybe their actions aren't what people might consider good actions. But I think in reality, most people want to do the right thing, and they are good neighbors. I think it's just more helping them and getting to know them so that their goodness can be apparent, that they can be a part of things, and they can just kind of blossom, I guess, as far as what community developers and people like to see is, hey, this is a thriving community. I think all the elements are there. It's just difficult conditions for them to blossom and come to the forefront. So, as far as characteristics, I think caring about your neighbors, caring about your community, stability. probably be the main thing. Just good people.
Yeah.
Good people make good neighbors.
Good people make good neighbors. Yeah. Hopefully we can keep growing in that way.
Sure.
And while we're all trying to become better neighbors ourselves.
Yeah.
Jim, Arline, thanks for joining us on the Neighboring Podcast. Thanks for agreeing to be part of this kind of research project and sharing your time and your energy and coordination with us, with the hope that we can encourage you and empower and bring some additional resources to Hoagland Masterson. We're big fans of your work and your efforts, and would love to do whatever we can in NeighborLink to continue supporting those efforts. So thank you for that. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Neighboring. We've got one more week with this podcast series on what makes a healthy neighborhood healthy. We'll see you next week.